here's where we go off into the deep end, but I'm just going to say this. Has there been the possibility of an infiltration by some of them into our world? I think the answer is yes. You'd be a fool to pretend that it's impossible. And so then what you look for is, what evidence could be used to support this? And the only evidence that I could use to support it is the research of various UFO researchers who have collected their own stories of interaction with human-looking non-humans. There's a lot of those. I've encountered a few of them myself from people. They're quite compelling. I do think that there's an element.
Just a moment. You've encountered a few.
I've spoken
human-looking aliens.
Not me personally. I've interviewed a number of people who were quite credible to me. One was a retired U.S. Air Force colonel with a PhD who had a hell of an experience. I've talked about it from time. I can mention it here. I spoke to a woman who actually I liked her story even more. Housewife from Western Pennsylvania. I met her 15 years ago at a conference. She came up to my table. I was selling some books, with her husband. And she said, I just want to tell you this crazy story that happened to me in 1965 when I was 15 years old. So I said, all right, go. So she was in church with her mother in this tiny little town in Western Pennsylvania, where she said everyone knew everyone, especially in church, she said. And so she's with her mom, and she said this couple walked in to sat in front of her. She said they were like supermodels. They were absolute male, female. She said they were just like gorgeous Hollywood, blonde. She said they had this most perfect blue clothing that she'd ever seen. And she, I think, even implied, like, as a 15-year-old girl, I was kind of obsessed with fashion, all of that. But she's studying the fabric of what they were wearing. She said it was the most amazing, like they were the most amazing spectacle in this church. And she said, I was shocked that no one was looking at them. She said, I was mesmerized by them. I couldn't take my eyes off them. And they seemed like they didn't quite fit in. And then she said to me, and that's when I could hear them in my mind. I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, I could hear them thinking to each other. They weren't talking. I could hear them thinking. I said, well, what were they thinking? She said, well, it was kind of like one was saying to the other, well, we appear to be fitting in pretty well here. And then the other one said, yes, except for the girl behind us who can hear us. This is what she said to me. And I'll pause and I'll just say, this woman was eminently believable to me. It's absolutely credible. So to continue, she hears this telepathically, I guess. And she was kind of shocked. Who wouldn't be? And she said, at that point, though, I didn't hear anything else from them. So it was as if they knew this security breach and they shut it down. So they go through the rest of church. This is a Catholic mass, by the way. And she was almost amused by the fact that they didn't seem to know how to act within a Catholic mass. I grew up going to Catholic mass. So sit, kneel, do the sign of the cross, you get up, you do all these different things, all these motions. They were looking around to try to do it right. Mm-hmm. So anyway, mass ends finally, and she's fascinated by them, of course. And they get up and they're out of the church immediately. They jump ahead of the crowd and they're gone. And she gets into her mind that she is going to follow them. So her mother was sitting next to her, oblivious to the whole scenario. The young woman who's telling me the story gets up and she works her way through the crowd. Her mother is yelling, get back here, young lady. Where do you think you're going? What are you doing? What's going on? And the girl just goes. So she gets to the front of the church and she sees the couple. And they've walked across this big parking lot and they're going over this little crest of a hill. And she scoots across the parking lot. She gets to the top of the hill. She sees them. They're walking down this field toward a wooded area. And she starts down after them. And then she stops dead in her tracks because she sees a third person. This is crazy, but I swear to you, this is what she said to me. She said, there's a man standing at the edge of the woods. She said, do you remember the character Lurch from the Addams Family TV show? tall, black suit. She said he looked kind of like that guy. She looked like Lurch. Very tall, and it intimidated her, it frightened her.
And where did this person appear from?
From the edge of the woods. He was waiting for this couple that was walking to him. The couple that was in church. They're walking across the field toward this guy, according to the woman. They walk into the woods with the guy. He turns, he walks into the woods with them. And that's the end of her story. That was the whole thing. So it was a crazy thing. It's like, who are these people? Who is Lurch over there? What was this? It's very bizarre. It seems like you've got this group of blonde, blue-eyed, Pleiadian looking, I'm not saying they were from the Pleiades, but these individuals that were very unusual, that appear to have a telepathic capability. And they're going into the church for some unknown reason. They didn't drive there in a car. They're coming through these woods. What's that all about? I got a similar story from a retired colonel, and I'll make this very brief, but basically the same type of story. He told this to me with his wife, who was present. They were at a Las Vegas casino hotel when this happened. They were with a third friend, and they see this woman that they are convinced was telepathic and an alien. And the reason was the friend that they were with, apparently, according to this colonel, was a psychic, a friend of theirs. Who knows what that means? But the psychic stopped and she said to the colonel, that woman there she's not like us. And the woman was this absolutely drop-dead, beautiful blonde woman in a blue outfit. Of course, it's Las Vegas, and you're going to get that in Las Vegas. But nonetheless, that's what this psychic said. So the psychic and the wife went down an escalator to get away. They were nervous. The colonel stood behind, and he's observing the woman. And he said to me, she was maybe 50 feet away. He said, like she turned slightly toward him, and he heard her in his mind, he said to me. Just like what this other woman said. He heard this woman in his mind, and the woman almost sounded like a police officer on the beat, essentially, nothing to see here, go about your business. This is not anything for you. Like, that's what he heard, and it startled him. He's thinking, what's this all about? And then at that moment, this equally beautiful man, blonde hair, blue, maybe they were in Cirque du Soleil, who knows, really, but he's conferring with her. He can't hear them. They then walk toward the escalator where he's standing, and he's thinking, good, I'm going to confront them. I'm going to say something. And they walk right by him. He says nothing. And then he follows them down the escalator. This is actually hilarious because as they're going down the escalator, the wife interrupted his story to me. And she says, oh my God, my friend and I were hiding behind a slot machine, peeking behind a slot machine, watching these two. That is a comical element to this. So it was good, though, that she was there to kind of corroborate this story, you know? Anyway, the couple gets down to the bottom of the escalator and they just walk off unmolested. They go about their business. That's the end of them. But what's weird is that the three of them are talking about this afterward. And the psychic friend apparently also did some kind of hypnotherapy, regression, who knows? Like, there's a lot of people who will do that. And she says to the colonel, I could regress you and maybe you can remember better what some of the things that you may have heard. I think that's what they were getting into. And he goes to do this with her. And when he does the regression, this is a couple of days later, every time she's trying to regress him, they hear construction noise outside the house, jackhammers and noises. They go actually to check and there's nothing there. So they give up. He says, look, I'll be back in town next month. Maybe we can do it then. So he calls a month later and says, hey, I'm going to be around. Let's try that regression again. The friend says, what regression? He says, the regression that we did last month. Don't you remember? According to what he said, and the wife, she had no memory of that. She had no memory of the event. So somehow in the subsequent month, her memory had been tampered with by some unknown group. I think that's a pretty crazy story, but I had no problem believing this colonel who told me this, and his wife, who was there to corroborate critical parts of it. So what are these people? Who are they? Are they just regular human beings who've just got gnarly powers and they can get inside your head? Well, maybe. Or maybe there's something else going on. Maybe there's a faction of beings that are just very quietly hanging out here for whatever purpose. I tend to think that is true. I don't think they all look human. I think that there are definitely beings that do not look human. And I think that as far as what's the general scenario, I've been taking a long time to get to that, and I apologize. But I think that we are, and our planet, are subject of great, great interest right now. I do think there's probably a lot of life in the universe, but I still maintain I think planets like our own are quite special and unique, and not a dime a dozen. And when we don't just have life here, we have complex, incredible life that's everywhere. We are exploding with all kinds of genetic diversity. So that's got to be of interest. And then where we are as a species are of interest. Where are they coming from? Are they coming from another planet or another dimension? Are they physical or are they spiritual? I'm going to say I think that they are physical. They may have an ability to manipulate what we would consider dimensions. And I think that's where the interdimensional aspect probably comes in. I don't know that I would call them the ones who are landing in craft, the ones who are entering oceans or coming out of oceans or coming in from an altitude of 200,000 feet down to land on the ground, tracked on radar. I don't think that they're spiritual entities. I think they're physical. And they come from somewhere. I assume they come from another world. That they're quite advanced. And figuring out the agenda is really very, very important. And I don't know that I've got all the answers as to what the agendas are. Are they benign or are they malevolent? I think it's a real fallacy to say that a species that is inherently much more technologically advanced is inherently more ethical than ours. I mean, a lot of the New Age community, I think, seems to believe this, that these ETs are all ethical. And
why do you think that is? Why do you think they believe that?
They're naive. They're just very naive. They're idealists. They don't know any better. I mean, that's really what I believe. I think it's really pretty simple. There's a lot of naivete in our society about this. Now, I'm not saying that these other aliens haven't figured out a way to manage their society in a way that they can prevent themselves from destroying themselves. They probably do that through some form of totalitarian control, though. Hive mind, that seems to me the most logical way that they would do it. You have to control. But, I mean, look, if they come from another planet, you have to assume a few things. That they, like us, became the apex predators of their world. They would have forward-facing, binocular predatory vision. They are used to manipulating the environment. They were, to get to the point of being the top species on their planet, that meant that they had to subjugate other species to do their work for them, which is what we do. We subjugate plants, we subjugate animals, we make them work for us. We take it all for granted, but we wouldn't be able to do what we do without controlling all the other species of the planet. And so they must have done the same thing. And they must have gone through a period of extreme violence to do so, which is what we've done. We've only succeeded because we're violent. That's what they must have done. Now, maybe they're not as outwardly violent anymore, but that doesn't mean they're not used to getting their own way. I'm sure they're used to getting their own way because they're quite good at it. And so they're here now. So what does that mean? Well, they're used to getting their own way. Now, they may support our development. They may have problems with our development. They may understand many, many things that we have not even begun to understand. I'm sure that's true. But does that mean inherently that they have what we would say are our best interests at heart? I don't know that for an instant. I don't know that for an instant. I have to assume they have, as long as they have physical bodies, as long as they need to eat food and have a shelter and reproduce, then I have to assume that they have their own interests. And those interests might coincide with ours to a certain extent, or they may diverge from ours to a certain extent. Just like any intelligent species would have divergent interests. Governments and military authorities around the world know that flying saucers exist and that they are from another planet. Apparently, they have absolute proof of both of these facts. Second, there were 6 flying discs already have crashed on this Earth. This is 1958, and were captured and were taken apart, he said, by militaries and scientists of the countries involved. He said under like extreme security to keep this absolutely secret. And he gave some information about where these discs had crashed, or at least the Brazilian Navy guys gave Fontes information, which he then relayed to Coral Lorenzen. So we're talking 1940s and 50s here. One supposedly crashed in the Sahara Desert, but was too destroyed to be of any use. He said 3 crashed in the United States, 2 of them in very good condition. The 5th one crashed somewhere in the British Isles, and then the last one, they said, came down in one of the Scandinavian countries, and those 2 were almost undamaged as well. Just continuing on with this, they went on and said these 6 discs all were, this is very confusing, either 32, 72, or 99 feet in diameter. Those are the only sizes he gave: 32 feet, 72 feet, 99 feet. And I think it was the Aztec crash that was said to be 99 feet in diameter. And so here he is in 1958 giving that same information. They also said, along with this point of crash retrievals, that dead alien bodies were found in all of them. These were described as little men. They were ranging in height from 32 inches to 46 inches, a little under 3 feet to a little under 4 feet. They were all dead. They were killed in the crash. The examination of the bodies showed they were definitely humanoid, but obviously not from this planet. That's according to what these men told Fontes. The ships were all saucer-shaped with a dome. They were all made of very light metal, which was assembled in segments that fitted in deep grooves and were pinned together around the base. He's writing this in 1958. This was, in fact, the claim of the, I think, the Kingman craft that came down in 1953. I believe it was Kingman. Kingman or Aztec, I think Kingman. But in any case, he said that you couldn't tell from the outer surface of the ships, but they would come apart. Some of the craft, they said, had portals made of some very exotic, unknown type of glass, and there were a lot of other unknown materials that were found inside the ships. So now I'll just take a little side travel here. I'll just say for the record, we can more or less corroborate, I would say, 5 out of the 6 cases that they're talking about. So I went through Ryan Wood's very excellent book on UFO crash retrievals called Magic Eyes Only. It is unfortunately out of print. Would love to see that book back in print. I'm lucky I've got a copy. And it's very useful. He did, this is in the late 90s when he wrote it, a very comprehensive look of all of the crash retrieval cases that were discussed up to that point. Only the Sahara case doesn't seem to have an entry. Now, the American cases could be from any number of candidates, since there's more than 3 alleged crash retrievals in America from the 40s and 50s. You've got Cape Girardeau of 1941. You've got the Trinity crash, which was just recently written about by Jacques Vallée and Powell Harris. That's 1945. You've got Roswell, 1947. You've got the Aztec, New Mexico crash of 1948. You have the Del Rio, Texas case of 1950, and you've got Kingman, Arizona, 1953. Those are only the most significant ones. There are others that are also potentially important, but these 6, I think, are quite prominent. And you might ask, well, why then are the Brazilians only telling him about 3 American crashes, not 6 or more? I would say there's really no reason why you would expect these Brazilian officers to know about every single American UFO crash recovery. Why would they know? It's not their country. They're intelligence officers, but that does not mean that they're going to get full data on everything. They're, very likely scrambling to figure this out, just like other organizations are as well. Now, the alleged British recovery is a little more sketchy, but in Ryan Wood's book, I did He did have some corroborating information about this. And actually, I think he traced information about it to a potential inside leak by the famous Lord Mountbatten, who did have a very strong interest in UFOs and a lot of knowledge of it. The British case is believed to have occurred during the Second World War. That would make it earlier than Roswell, probably earlier than the Trinity case as well. Interesting. We don't have a lot of information about it, unfortunately. The Scandinavian case, in my view, could be one of two things. It could refer to the ghost rockets of 1946, in which we do know that the Swedish government did acquire some of the pieces of whatever it was that came down there. We do know that, and that comes from a Swedish declassified document. It could also refer, though, to an infamous case from 1952 in Spitsbergen, Norway. A lot of people believe that is a hoax. It could very well have been a hoax. However, that event was reported in several German publications at the time, and it is true that a number of people did think that this was possibly legit when it happened. And I wonder if these Brazilian officers suspected that it was the real deal as well. We don't really know. Again, we just have to remember, simply because these men had some information on the subject doesn't mean that like everything that they knew was accurate. We don't really know. All we know is what Fontes wrote to Cora Lorenzen in this particular letter. So that's the end of that. Let me move to the third point of the, I don't think there's anything else really that I have for point number 2. Let's just pull this back up. Point number 3, what these men said to him is that we examined the instruments and devices aboard these discs, and they also said we believe they move by some kind of extremely powerful electromagnetic field, and they gave a little bit of detail on that as well. And then number 4, well, I kind of mentioned this already. The ships were carefully dismantled and studied. What they did not understand, the men said, was how the fields were produced. Like what was the source of the tremendous amount of energy that would be released through these fields that allowed these craft to go. They didn't have any clues. They didn't really know where they got their power from, and so forth. There was speculation that this was some kind of nuclear engine, but I don't think that these Brazilian officers, at least whatever they told Fontes, didn't really seem to indicate that they had a clear idea. Point number 5, the scientists believed that they could find a way that it would be possible to do this, but they didn't know yet how to convert energy. This part confused me a little bit because what they said, convert energy from a nuclear reactor directly into electric power. I always thought that's what nuclear power plants do exactly, and there was nuclear power by the late 50s, but maybe they're talking about something else here. I'm not really quite sure. Point number 6, there had been a number of attempts to shoot these objects down. They generally were not successful, and aircraft had been lost. Multiple aircraft had been lost in the attempt to do that. And, basically they were saying our militaries are just totally outclassed by these things. And in fact, there were attempts to use guided missiles to shoot these. That did not work either. These craft are way faster than even guided missiles. And so that's that. They also actually went on, they said, look, these things have the ability to paralyze our electronics, our electrical systems, our radar. They can interfere with our radio and television apparatuses, and they can short circuit our electric power plants, that type of thing. He goes on, point number 7, they haven't shown any interest in contacting us, at least up till now. The men said they're obviously preparing some kind of planet-wide, huge military operation. They were actually expressed concern that they were in danger from these aliens. Is there going to be some kind of war? What's this going to be? We don't know that they're hostile, but we don't like the way it looks, essentially, is the impression that they gave him. They said that there's international cooperation from militaries and governments around the world. They are being informed about the situation. There's an exchange of information through intelligence services, and top secret military conferences were being held every now and then or periodically to discuss any new developments going on. In fact, they said the Brazilian Navy receives monthly, this is 1958, monthly classified reports from the U.S. Navy and report back to the U.S. on any additional information. And they said there's similar contacts existing between our Army and our Air Force. And they said similar other or several other military organizations in other countries. So they actually said, like in Brazil, the only people who work, like the only people in the know are those intelligence officers in our military who actually work on this. There's a few high-ranking officers in the high command. There's their own National Security Council, a few scientists, and that's it. Basically, most people are in the dark, they said. Point number 9, this relates to the previous points. Very deep secrecy on UFOs. It's not only classified, they said, it is absolute top secret. Civilian authorities and also military officers in general do not have a need to know. They are not entitled to know. And they said even our president is not informed of the whole truth. That is the president of Brazil, does not know the full story. Very interesting. I could believe that, as a matter of fact. Point number 10 is that they said all the experts, all the military experts, all the scientific people who were brought in, we all agree that the public does not have a need to know about this. This would not be a good idea from their perspective. They think that knowledge is way too much of a shock. It would paralyze life in our society for years to come. And again, this is an interesting little quote that Fontes relayed to Coral Lorenzen, that they said, we think they're doing a reconnaissance of the planet. We expect maybe it will last another 10 years before something happens. It was almost like they thought there was going to be some kind of timetable before an open conflict were to occur. This at least was the impression they gave Fontes. Obviously, that did not happen. This conversation's in the late 50s, and 10 years, that's just the late 60s, and we certainly did not have an open, acknowledged conflict. But this is what they said to him. They estimated the probability of these objects being hostile at something like 90%. That was their take on it, as what they said to him. And then finally, again, these points kind of roll into each other, but this is how Fontes gave it to Coral Lorenzen, that to conceal the truth from the public, there was a carefully planned censorship and disinformation program that's been under operation for many years. The whole policy is to debunk, and debunk the whole subject using ridicule, that's useful, and anything else. And in fact, one thing that they said is that these guys, they've used all the tricks in the trade, that is hide evidence and also threaten individuals when need be. The impression that they gave is that even some people may have been killed, or at least if they haven't been killed, that's not off the table. There's they said, we're not interested in the so-called inalienable rights of people. They said, right or wrong, we, the military, we're going to do our job, and no one is going to stop us. That was basically the content of what Fontes is telling Coral Lorenzen in this letter from February 27, 1958. So now, I mean, here's what we can ask. Why should we believe Dr. Olivo Fontes? Is he just, spinning a yarn here? Or, which I don't really think is the case. I mean, first of all, Fontes was a practicing physician. He had a lot of respect in his field and in the UFO field. I can tell you, having read a number of his letters and reports, and I'm going to show you part of one at the end of this here. The man was meticulous. He was very exact, very energetic, was chasing down many Brazilian UFO reports at the time, including the Ubatuba incident, of which we are still studying it to this day. So that's Fontes. I think, he certainly had the complete trust of the Lorenzens. And the fact is, in his entire life, he never gave any reason why his word was less than stellar, why we should not, take him at face value for what he has had to say. I personally think the man's earned the right to our trust on this matter. And besides, if it wasn't the Brazilian naval intelligence who told him this, and who gave him this information, where's this coming from? There's a lot of detail there. So I think Fontes was telling the truth. And then finally, he gave himself a very reasonable explanation as to why these men would have visited him. He had been to the Brazilian Navy Ministry earlier that day, which was their stated reason. So apparently he'd gotten their attention. Now, if we choose to believe all of Ofantes, and I do choose to believe, I totally believe the truth of that letter, we could ask, why would these naval intelligence guys have spoken to him? Why? Well, the first obvious reason is that they wanted the fragments of the Ubatuba crash. That was clear. Failing that, they clearly went to plan B, which was that they wanted to win him over. They wanted to make him compliant with them. Doesn't seem like that succeeded, but that was their goal. So to do that, to get him on your side, you got to give something to get something. So they gave him this information. Was their information true? Now we're getting to the real nub of the matter. Well, we can't know for 100% certainty, but I will just say this. After 65 years, everything that he wrote that I just described to you struck me as incredibly plausible and actually is quite accurate. I think it describes the UFO situation of today pretty darn well. And what's remarkable is that this is from early 1958. Again, 65 years ago. Now, in the 1950s, there had already been, I should say, some talk about UFO crash, retrieval, and recovery. And this, of course, most famously was from a very well-known book by American writer Frank Scully that was published way back in 1950 called Behind the Saucers. And his book had discussed the Aztec UFO crash and the recovery of small alien bodies. So the claims had been out there for at least 8 years almost 8 years when Fontes wrote his letter. So you could say, well, maybe he's just working off of that. But as many people know, Scully's book was almost immediately subjected to a withering smear attack not long after it was published, with the result that nearly all UFO researchers just ran away from the idea of crash retrievals until the idea is revived in the 1970s. Although, again, what became obvious from my interview with Alan Levine and now from this letter is that at least the folks at APRO had reason to be open to the idea of crash retrievals. And this is, I suspect, one important reason why. The Lorenzans had a very high regard for Oliver Fontes. And so I think this letter would have had a strong impact on their thinking. And again, keep in mind, this is a long time ago. Fontes is talking in detail about, well, not detail, but he's giving some explicit facts about 6 UFO events. And in 1958, 6 crashes would definitely seem like a lot at the time. That's one thing. And he's talking about multiple small bodies having been acquired. He's talking about an intensive program to study all of this, all back in 1958. And in addition, you have a scenario that he's describing of ongoing confrontational and at times hostile encounters between the world's militaries and these other beings. And we should add some information about some of the technical aspects of the UFO craft themselves. Not a great deal, but enough to make it interesting. And you have an acknowledgement, or at least a statement by Fontes, that the cover-up of the UFO subject was essentially an international conspiracy. I think that's the right word we want to use here. So all of those reasons, I think, are enough to make us recognize that in the 1950s, you had it wouldn't take a lot of imagination to kind of fill in the blanks with that reality about the nature of the UFO cover-up. It's one thing to say, as the Pentagon today says in their utterly banal manner, well, we don't know, but perhaps there's something out there and we are investigating it. We're going to make sure it's not a threat to blah, 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 blah. That's what they do. All right. That's one thing. It's a totally different scenario to recognize that craft have come down, they have been recovered, and that there is extreme intense secrecy on the entire matter.